Welcome to another episode of the 2 for 1 podcast. I'm your host, Dion, and alongside me, my fellow co-host, live from the state that is currently suing Amazon, the Garden State, going after the big guys. It is the man, the myth, the Nate, Mr. Taylor. When's the last time you bought something on Amazon?
I think the mics that we took to Las Vegas like a year ago. I don't use Amazon.
Okay, fair enough. Well,
We're against big whatever the big, not big pharma, but like a big whatever, big Amazon.
Big business.
Yeah, big business.
Fair. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm not much of an Amazon shopper myself, but joining us today, we have senior NBA insider for Hoops Hype and fellow Hofstra alum, Mike Scotto is here to help us break down all the remaining storylines for this offseason, hopefully put a bow on what has been quite a dragged out summer for the NBA with multiple notable free agents still on the market, investigations still taking place, lots to get into. But Michael, thanks for coming on the show today. How's your Thursday going so far?
You got it. It's been a long summer. You know, LeBron took a little bit of time. Here we are. I got to go away to the Jersey Shore for a little and still had to work a little bit from the beach, but it's better when you could report and like you got the ocean in the background. It made it better. So not bad. We still got a little more like you touched on. Peyton Watson, Jonathan Kuminga, Ben Mathurin. You know, some people were wondering if an Anthony Davis extension would happen in the near future. It doesn't seem as likely now. Doesn't mean it won't get done, but just not in the immediate future. So, you know, that's going to be something to monitor a little bit. And then you got a few more rookie extensions maybe, but generally August is supposed to be the lull, but we still got some notable guys out there.
Yes, sir. Yeah, let's start with those free agents. So, Kuminga is one that I'll be honest, less interested in than some of the other names that are out there. Between Peyton Watson, Jalen Duren, Ben Mathurin, still waiting their next contract. Those are kind of like the three big restricted free agents still on the board. There's been a ton of reporting on where all of them might land, what their contracts might look like. But what's the latest that you've heard as far as those guys landing a deal before training camp gets started in just a few weeks?
Yeah, look, I mean, I had touched on in my reporting on Hoops Up, I think Jalen Duren would be somewhere in the mid-30s per year. I don't see him going anywhere other than Detroit. I think a qualifying offer would be a little wild to me, personally. You know, he had a great breakout year. To me, you got to capitalize on it now. I feel like Detroit's acted in good faith here in terms of negotiations. So, you know, I know he's ideally wanted, you know, 40 million or more. I think that's a little tough, given where things are. I think if you can get, you know, somewhere around the mid-30s, I think it's fair. Personally, you know, then you touched on some of these other guys. I mean, Peyton Watson, it's all about, is he getting a sign and trade to Cleveland, Milwaukee? You know, the Hawks and the Clippers did not seem as likely as of now. And if not, is he just go back to Denver either on a multi-year deal or take the 1-year qualifying offer, which is about $6.5 million. And then you become an unrestricted free agent the following year. But it's a risk because if you get hurt or, you know, your play isn't up to par, you can cost yourself some money. So it's a tough balancing act. You know, right now there's still active talks there on that. You know, Jonathan Kuminga, you guys touched on a little bit with JK. Minnesota's been in the mix lately now, trying to convince him to take less money and offering him a starting power forward spot. However, you've got the Los Angeles Lakers that can give him more money and the starting power forward spot, and you get to play with Luka Doncic. But obviously, to this point, he's wanted to try to get a little bit more money. That's kind of been the holdup just with his free agency decision. You've had Cleveland also in the mix there. And, you know, that's kind of dependent a little bit on what happens with Peyton Watson, who's kind of their primary target. So you got all these kind of dominoes moving. And Ben Mathurin, the Los Angeles Clippers restricted free agent you have, he has to wait a little bit just because like the league is figuring out what they're going to do with the Kawhi Leonard situation with aspiration with the Clippers. So that affects some of his talks a little bit there, and whether the trade for Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick goes through with the draft compensation, or, you know, if something happens with aspiration, do they change what the deal would look like in terms of the draft compensation? Time will tell. We still got to figure out a little bit that. But for Ben Mathurin, I touched on Hoops Up. He's got about 5 teams in the mix there. Some would be like sign and trade. So again, everybody is kind of slow playing it a little bit now. In the NBA world, deadlines deliver action, and there's no specific urgency yet. I think the further you get along into this, well, I would say for Kuminga being unrestricted, maybe he wants to get something done more. But in the restricted game, uh, you could take this all the way into September if you really want. So time will tell. But I think for vacation purposes for everybody, nobody would want to do that. But sometimes, like I said, the deadline dictates the actions.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way it's kind of all linked together too, like you said, like with Peyton Watson and the teams that are interested in him versus Ben Mathurin. Like it feels like one of those things will happen, and then we'll just see just like a free for all of transactions take place. I think the Peyton Watson one is the one that's most interesting to me. I think he's got the highest upside of any of these guys, and it's a tough needle to thread for Denver and for Watson, just because obviously Denver, I believe, are they the only team in the second apron as of right now? Is that right?
Currently, yes.
Yeah. So they're under a huge salary crunch right now. They did somehow sign Lonnie Walker last night to a veteran minimum deal, which I like.
Yeah, but that's a non-guaranteed deal. So I don't think anybody knows that, but it's a non-guaranteed deal. So it's like, he goes to camp, competes for spot, and if he makes the team, well, then it's a different story. But they've got flexibility with that. I know some people, to your point, when the Lonnie Walker signing came out, people were like, oh, wait, what does this mean for Peyton Watson? Take it easy. Don't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. And they're still, figuring out with Peyton what's going to happen there. Denver doesn't want to give up Peyton Watson. Like, they would like to keep him ideally. So it's just about figuring it out. Or if a team is going to meet their asking price on a sign and trade, well, then now you got to look at it. You do have Spencer Jones now, who you were able to match the offer sheet that the Oklahoma City Thunder offered him, which was about 2 for 12-ish, which I had reported. And then, ESPN had first that they were matching it. So, in that instance, they've got a little bit of a netting in case they have to have a fallback option here. And, financially with Peyton, they can't do it, but still remains to be seen. Still a lot of negotiations in terms of teams offering him a deal and in terms of what they're willing to offer, not only to pay the kid, but if you're going to do a sign and trade, are you giving a first round pick? Are you giving more than that? Do you have second round picks as well? Is there a scenario where they take maybe Zeke Naji off Denver's books, a guy that has 2 years and they've been trying to move for some time? These are all variables that are getting figured out on a day-to-day basis, and we're still here in early August, and nothing's decided yet.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you think. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know you said Denver wants to keep him, but with like you said, the Spencer Jones thing and OKC forcing them to match, is there like a realistic path in your opinion to them actually keeping Watson, or is it is he starting to pack his bags already?
No, you could. I mean, look, it depends on. Pretty simply, it's like, does the Kroenke family want to pay the luxury tax bill or not? That's the question. And I mean, for years, they've obviously not gone that route. But what's interesting is, Nikola Jokic has obviously publicly stated that he wants to remain a Denver Nugget for the rest of his career. And to my knowledge, that remains the case. But the caveat here is that he hasn't technically signed his contract extension yet. Now, the variable there is that in a year from now, he can get more money in another year. So there's some logistics to this, but by not doing it technically yet, it kind of puts a little bit of pressure on Denver to make sure that they feel the contending team around him. And when you've got the Spurs and the Thunder in the Western Conference, you've got to feel the best team possible. And, Denver wasn't healthy last year. They think they could have made more of a run if they were healthy, but they had injuries, not only to Jokic, who rarely gets hurt, but Aaron Gordon had hamstring trouble. You had Jamal Murray, who was hurt. Watson missed time. They were walking wounded for most of the year, and I thought they did as best they could. But if they come back a healthy team, I do think they're a contender. I truly believe that. Anytime you have Jokic, arguably the best player in the world, you've got a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you feel like is the Kroenke's appetite for taking on a big luxury tax bill? Obviously, historically, I think I was doing some research on this. I think they've paid about 60-ish mil in like the history of their franchise and luxury tax payments. They're projected to pay, I think, a little bit more than that if they bring Peyton Watson back at what is like his expected market rate. What do you feel like is the number that would kind of push them more towards a sign and trade rather than bringing him back? And if it is a sign and trade, what value do you think they'd be looking for in order to pull the trigger there?
Well, so I mean, the caveat to this is you can go into the season over the second apron if you want, and you can make trades to kind of get out of it. You know, a lot of people around the league thought that Cam Johnson was going to be the guy that they would move. Christian Brown's name came up. Aaron Gordon drew trade interest. I think there are things that they can do to maneuver around that, but the question then becomes, you know, even if you bring back Watson, would you look at flipping him eventually down the line as an asset that way under team control? You can look at that down the line, but for Kroenke and the Nuggets, it's really up to him as far as the appetite. I would say that I think that family has heard the noise about them not willing to spend as much, but so far they're projected to spend a lot of money. So with that said, I think for a year you could do it, but if you're going to be in the second apron or pretty close to it, you got to be a championship contender. With that said, Denver thinks if they're healthy, they can be that. So I think the money aspect of it, while it's notable, I think a little bit has been overblown, because clearly if you look at the books even right now, they're already over, and they matched Spencer Jones. They didn't want him to go to Oklahoma City. They thought it was a fair enough deal where, you know, you could even, if you have to down the line with his consent, because he would have a no trade clause to an extent, you could theoretically move him too. They have optionality there. You know, they've resisted breaking up the core, like the core four that's been there for the longest time. They still think it could have a little bit of legs left, but with that said, like Gordon and Murray have drawn interest in the past, leading up to now, even this summer. So they have some optionality there.
And then as far as the Mathurin situation, I mentioned it there because it's been reported that the Pelicans have some interest there. Pelicans, you know, pretty quiet this offseason after a 26-win season. So I would definitely like to see them make a move like that for Mathurin. Do you feel like there's legit smoke there? Where do you feel like is the most likely landing spot for him?
Yeah, I mean, look, I had reported on this a little bit. So, like, for the sign, that would have to be kind of a sign and trade there, most likely for the Pelicans. Well, I should say this, actually. Hold on. There's a route where they can get off Jordan Hawkins and then use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception and just offer that to Ben Mathurin. But right now, that would put them over the luxury tax. They're not trying to go over the luxury tax. So whether it's a sign and trade mechanism or if you just offer him the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, another trade would have to be done there. Likely you're trying to get off Jordan Hawkins' salary. I had touched on some trade talks with Memphis about A.J. Johnson, for example, because that would save them a decent amount of money. And then there's other ways they can get to that full non-tax mid-level without being over the luxury tax. Or you can maybe start a little bit going over it into the season and then get out of it by the trade deadline. So, yes, there is some real interest there. I mean, there's other teams, Chicago who had been in the mix, Milwaukee on the back burner, Dallas a little bit. And obviously, I think kind of gets overlooked, the Los Angeles Clippers, who have his restricted rights. So those were the 5 teams for now.
I'm not sure the likelihood of him signing like an offer sheet, because I don't know how much teams really can offer him without doing a sign and trade. But like, let's say he does sign an offer sheet before this whole aspiration thing gets resolved. Does that start to get a little bit messy with the Clippers having to try to match within that 48-hour window?
Yeah, I mean, ideally the Clippers wanted to have a resolution to the Kawhi thing first. I would also tell you that I think, you know, for the Clippers, while they have the 1-year qualifying offer on the table, once the Kawhi situation gets settled, they could talk to Mathurin a little bit more about multi-year deals potentially, and if there's something that makes sense there, which I have heard is a possibility. So I don't know if it would behoove Ben to just take a non-tax mid-level. You know, maybe he can get a little more. Again, this is a guy that's like 23 years old, 24, somewhere around that range. I'd have to double check, but He's a really young player. He was obviously the draft picks that they got in the Ivica Zubats trade were the headliners, but he was the best player that they got back, and a young guy that they wanted to take a flyer on for sure. And a guy that averaged a career high in points this year at over 17 a game. So you know that he can score the ball and help your team in that regard. And the Clippers are going to need scoring this year. Darius Garland, talented player, but has been injured at times. Keaton Wagler's a rookie. Whether Kawhi or Brandon Ingram is there, ultimately, that's one other scorer, but you need guys that can put the ball in the hole. And there's no sense in tanking now because of the relegation zone. So all these variables, if you're the Clippers, you have to keep in mind.
For sure. Transitioning to, some of the other free agents that are out there outside of the restricted market. I think with Draymond coming back to Golden State, James Harden is probably the biggest remaining free agent on the unrestricted side of things. Obviously, you've done some reporting on that as well. I think all expectations are that he's going to go back to the Cavs. He was kind of doing the same thing that Draymond was doing, just kind of waiting to give the team some more flexibility. And like you said, they're linked to Peyton Watson as well. So when can we expect that situation to get resolved, and where do you expect that number, both in years and AAV, where do you expect that contract to come in for James Harden?
Well, I mean, I could tell you they've had constructs of 2 years and 3 years. Average annual salary, I'm not sure yet because that's dependent on whether they get Peyton Watson, do you get Kuminga or somebody else. So that's a pretty wide sliding scale. But the 2-3 year structure is more what's interesting to me because they could spread the money out and make it more advantageous for Cleveland to make some other moves to make the team better. Harden's been a willing participant in that regard, which I do think is interesting. So I think that's more the main thing. He's not going anywhere. He's staying in Cleveland for sure. At this point, it's not a question of if, it's when and how the structure is going to look like ultimately, how they spread out the money.
So assuming that they get Harden on maybe down to 20 something million a year and they spread it out over 3 years,
maybe high 20s.
Yeah. So Peyton Watson and Jonathan Kuminga then would probably be the next, they'd probably have that lined up if they were able to get Harden to that number.
Yeah, I would say both of those are kind of intertwined a little bit.
Okay. That makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I think the Cavs are in a spot where they're definitely very good. I don't know that I'd quite label them as a contender. I know they made the conference finals, but they didn't exactly make it all that competitive. Not that really anyone in the East did, but I just don't know. If they were to land a Kuminga or a Peyton Watson, does that change the outlook of this Cavs team for you?
I certainly think if they had one of those two guys, it makes them a better team, gives them more depth. I think the difference is what you have to weigh if you're Cleveland. If you're getting one of these two guys, you're probably getting off Max Strus and Dennis Schroeder. And, Strus was a rotation guy for them that started for them at one point when he came back healthy. Schroeder's been obviously the backup guard. And, I mean, when you have Harden and Mitchell, I don't know how many minutes he's going to have, but they lost Keon Ellis. They lost Dean Wade. They have to replenish some of those minutes. And I think that's going to be important. You got Tyson there that can come in and play more minutes. I think he's a rising guy. Malik Thomas that they drafted as a pretty good player and a good scorer as well. Maybe you see a little more Naquan Tomlin and some other guys off the bench, but I think you're looking at those two guys to add more athleticism, defensive versatility. In the case of Watson, he shot 41% from three last year. That'd be a welcome addition if he can keep that up. But, you'd be sacrificing a little bit more of your depth for a guy with a little bit more of a ceiling and a guy that's definitely younger than the other two guys comparatively in Strus and Schroeder.
So team fit wise. Team fit
I was gonna say they'd have to get off both in order to land a guy like Watson.
If you're gonna get Peyton Watson, I think with Kuminga they would try to do it for less, but I don't see Kuminga going there on a discount when he's got the Laker money available to him. And the thing with Kuminga is you have Kenny Atkinson there, who was with him in Golden State for a little bit. So there's some familiarity there, but it's not the most seamless basketball fit. If I'm ranking the basketball fits, I would put the Lakers and definitely the Timberwolves ahead of the Cleveland situation. Minnesota obviously has less money to work with. They'd have to make a trade to get to the taxpayer mid-level exception, which is around 6 million something. So that would be less money too. Cleveland could have that too, but again, from a basketball fit perspective, he's going to want more money if he's going to go to Cleveland in that instance.
Yeah, talking about the basketball fit wise, then is are the Cavs like your favorite destination for a potential Peyton Watson sign and trade?
Oh, that's an interesting question from a basketball fit. I mean, look, I think he would have been great with the Clippers, but that interest kind of seemed to go down a little bit now. Milwaukee is kind of in a talent acquisition mode and on young guys, but you've got Jaquez there, Hero. I mean, you've got other pieces there. I think for Cleveland, he could go in to potentially start, yeah. But I mean, realistically, too, if you're Denver, there's a spot for him right there to play on a really good team. I think ideally for everybody, it would be with Denver. It's just like you all mentioned to me. What's the appetite from Stan and Josh Kroenke to pay that luxury tax bill, especially if you're going to be over the second apron? It's a lot.
Right.
Nothing that I've seen reporting wise yet, but is there any world where like they bring back Peyton Watson and then explore Aaron Gordon trades because of his injury history and how much he hasn't been able to be there when they needed him most? I don't know if you've heard any rumors about that.
That's a plausible scenario you bring up. I don't know, though, if that would be there. I don't think trading Gordon would be what they would want to do.
Yeah.
Like Aaron Gordon, I can't think of a better basketball fit than Aaron Gordon next to Nikola Jokic and with that group. I mean, he could shoot. He can play defense in multiple forward positions. He can switch on a pick and pop if he has to guard on the perimeter for a little bit. I mean, Aaron Gordon is the definition of a guy that's a star in his role. And you could make the case that like he could have been like a fringe all-star, like when they're, one of the top 3 teams just because of the team success. But I mean, really talented player that's found a great niche with Denver.
Yeah, I love Aaron Gordon there. I like when he's actually on the court, zero complaints. It's so frustrating how important he is to that team, and then it just feels like time and time again, oh, we really need Aaron Gordon, and he's not there.
No,
Yeah,
that core is getting a little older. I get where you're coming from. Jamal Murray is another name that like is getting older, but he's been a proven playoff performer and a guy that him and Nikola Jokic have had a lot of success together. So,
I was gonna say, speaking of guys getting older, Steph Curry over in Golden State, definitely getting up there in age. There's been, some slight rumors that he might find his way out of Golden State. My Boston Celtics are probably the biggest team rumored as far as a landing spot for him. Do you think there's any legitimacy to Steph Curry potentially leaving the Warriors? And if so, do you think that'll happen this offseason or in the future? Not at all.
Not right now. No, I don't. I mean, look, Steph Curry on the Warriors is like Kobe Bryant on the Lakers. You know what I'm saying? This is a franchise icon that's won numerous championships. I mean, some of this is a little bit about legacy. Do I think he'd like to compete and have a better team? Sure. I think there was somebody that mentioned, oh, well, could Charlotte make a run at him? Well, Steph Curry doesn't fit Charlotte's timeline. It's a great storyline because, his father and he grew up in Charlotte. That's all fine and dandy, but I don't think you're giving up substantial assets to get a guy in his late 30s, and I don't think the Hornets are ready for that right now. They got a great young core over time. So, it's tricky. I mean, the Jimmy Butler situation, I think, plays a role here. Obviously, if they could have got LeBron, I think that would have changed things. They obviously they were trying to get Anthony Davis, which would have been interesting. But when Washington got him, they acquired him to keep him. So you've got all that to figure out, if you're Golden State. Moses Moody got hurt. They got to figure out Pajemski. I think Golden State's problem was just that, like, they've been on this, like, 2 timeline trajectory, and it doesn't work. Like, they had Wiseman, they had Kuminga, and you were trying to integrate those guys with a win-now team, and that just usually doesn't work. And it was proven to be. So, I mean, that's the main thing to me is like, I haven't heard anything about him wanting out right now. I mean, we'll see how the season goes, but at this moment here in August, early August, I haven't heard that.
So I should shut down my pipe dreams of a Paul George for Steph Curry trade is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
On Dion. What did you think of their decision to, once they didn't get LeBron, basically just throwing the money at Draymond Green? Because to me that was basically them just signaling like we're just gonna have a fun season with Steph, and they're not like, they don't have any aspirations of really contending.
Well, I mean, he had the player option, so it's like you kind of have an understanding that like I'll give you the flexibility, but if not, this needs to be on the table, or he would have just opted in from the get-go. So I mean, to me, that's kind of where that was. I didn't overly read into that. They are what they are right now. They're not a contender. They all know it, but they have assets to make moves. Previously they had been linked to Trey Murphy, but they didn't want to go to the asking price for Trey Murphy. So there are ways to make that team better, but it's also like, there was a time last year when they could have acquired Michael Porter Jr. and given up a first-round pick, as I had reported, but I think in a way for them, thankfully, they didn't do that, because then Steph got hurt. They weren't a real contender, but how would that have really moved the needle?
Right.
So I think they're kind of stuck in this middle, and it's a hard place to be in the NBA, but they can pivot. But it hasn't happened to this point, whether it was Anthony Davis, LeBron, Michael Porter Jr., anybody you look at, Trey Murphy, none of these guys that they've been linked to have come to fruition yet. Will that change? Maybe, but I haven't seen any evidence of that changing to this point.
Yeah. And until then, I mean, they're kind of, like you said, stuck in the middle, not really going anywhere with this current construction of the roster. Even if Jimmy does somehow come back healthy 100%, they're clearly like a piece or two short at the very least.
And if you're telling me that like that's the biggest trade acquisition they had, it's like, where are you? Are you a playing team at that point? Are you, at your highest possible ceiling, like a 6 seed or something at that point? Where's that ultimately getting you at that point?
Right. Yeah. Last thing I wanted to get to before we get you out of here, I really want to hear your thoughts on the Portland situation, just everything going on with Tom Dundon, kind of like strong-arming the city of Portland and potentially, people talking about moving the team out of there. That's something that, I think would be a devastating blow to the NBA. I know Portland isn't exactly like this dynastic franchise, but they're a big piece of NBA history. They've been there since the 70s, multiple finals appearances, guys like Bill Walton, Clyde Drexler, Dame. They've had a lot of icons. What have you been hearing about the situation as far as the long-term viability of the Trailblazers in Portland?
That's a loaded question. I mean, look, Tom Dundon has come in and radically changed the way that the Portland Trailblazers do things compared to a lot of other teams around the league. Definitely cut costs. Yeah. And I would say for Portland, I mean, you used the phrase like kind of trying to strong arm them a little bit. You already have to talk of the expansion teams with Seattle and Vegas. So my thing would be, where are you moving the Portland Trailblazers if that was ever going to come to fruition? I pumped the brakes a little bit on that talk just yet. Maybe because I'm an insider, I'm more of a cautious person by nature before making sure that we have more substantial evidence. But I mean, yeah, he's definitely ruffled some feathers there a little bit. I don't think that's any secret or question at this point. I would surmise if you're Adam Silver in the league, you want the Blazers in Portland because, like you said, they've got a lot of history. And when they were a good franchise competing, they filled the arena. They did fine business-wise. So they have a decent team. Like if you look at the team last year, they were kind of on the rise, and you got Denny Avdia under team control, who just became an all-star. Donovan Clingan took a step. You've got some young pieces there. They were trying to get Giannis and trying to make a big swing. They have enough assets to do it. So I think there's upside there if they stay in Portland. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just very confused on what the plan is because you look at, like you said, ruffled some feathers since Dundon got there, and now he's put himself in a situation where he either has to now sell back to the fan base that like they should invest in this team that he's clearly not that invested in, or like you said, got to find another place to go. And with Seattle and Vegas kind of already booked, I mean, I know I was listening to Bill Simmons. He kind of brought up Kansas City as a possibility. I don't really know if it's not going to be Seattle. It just kind of makes me think like, why didn't he just buy one of the expansion teams? Why didn't he wait for that? Or why didn't he buy the Mavericks? He's a guy
Because
that's from
Portland,
Dallas.
well, I can answer that question from a strategic standpoint. Portland costs less.
Fair. Okay. That's a good point.
The evaluations of two expansion teams, especially Vegas, is going to be more money than what he paid for Portland. I would surmise, based on intel and educated guessing, Seattle would be more too if you're trying to come into the league. So that was one theory that's kind of gone around a little bit. You buy Portland at a cheaper rate because he had money, but it wasn't like it didn't seem to me like he would have had enough to even go the expansion route. So this was the most plausible scenario to get into the league, get a team, and then go from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I know he kind of like barely scraped together the funds to get Portland. Yeah.
There you go.
Just to stay on the topic of the Blazers before we get you out of here, I want to ask one thing. Do you have any insight as to what their plan is right now with their 17 different point guards that they have on their team? Like, are they still potentially looking to trade Drew Holiday? Like, is Scoot Henderson?
I asked. I mean, they want to keep Scoot. They want to keep Drew. I was a little surprised. I mean, Drew's an older guy. I think he's a good winning player. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just looked at that roster and I kind of scratched my head with, like, you got John Morant, Dame Lillard, Drew Holiday, Scoot Henderson, who was their highly touted draft pick that has never really had a full runway to be the starter. He's not going to have that now. Dame's shooting ability can work alongside anybody. Drew's defensive ability could work side along either Ja or Dame. But I don't, like, if you're starting a 3-guard lineup like that, you're at a size deficit.
Right.
I mean, I know Klingon's the man in the middle and, like, you're fine there. But it makes it challenging. Then, like, what are you doing? You put an Avdi at the 4. You're kind of going small ball and a big 5. They've got a lot of different combinations they can have. I'm glad I'm not juggling that lineup card because that's a little tricky. Right. I'll be honest with you. And, like, you're a young guy like Scoot, you got to play. You don't really have a clear pathway there. The kid's also eligible for an extension. It's like tough situation to be, I feel like, if you're him. And like you said, Drew, winning player, could help a lot of teams. I think he'd be better more on a title contending team personally, but Portland has to make that decision. And I like Mike Nori. I think he's a talented coach, but I don't care if you're Phil Jackson or Red Auerbach. It's hard to juggle that lineup a little bit because, like you said, it's a surplus of guards.
At least they have an experienced veteran coach who's being well compensated on a long-term secure deal, right?
Yeah, hashtag sarcasm. I mean, look, Mike Nori deserved a shot. I mean, he was close previously. I just think that whole situation, the way it played out, was a bit bizarre. In the sense that it was we've never seen anything like that for an NBA head coach, and that definitely ruffled feathers in the coaching world. But it is what it is now.
Yeah, I was gonna say when the Coaches Association has to put out an official statement, basically just shunning the contract, like you know it's pretty bad. So
yeah, when have you ever seen that before?
Right, exactly. But yeah, that's pretty much all we had for you. Appreciate you coming on the show. Definitely want to give you an opportunity to plug your different outlets before we get you out of here.
Sure. Twitter, I mean, at Mike A. Scotto X, whatever you want to call it. You're gonna see everything there first.
Anything we should be looking forward to from you in the coming days and weeks?
I mean, anytime I have an Intel notebook, I try to put like multiple items, but at the same time, I'm not just writing something just to put out nonsense. Like, when I was away, there was some action more with Mathurin and definitely Kuminga and whatnot. You know, the AD thing was looming, so that's different. Now, AD, they're going to wait a little bit on that for extension talks. So kind of, I don't know about anything like imminent, but definitely like tweets, transaction stuff. You put that on mobile alert, you'll get something. Seems like almost every day, every other day at this point.
Right.
So I'll keep you guys informed as always.
Cool.
Yeah, make sure you have his notifications on because I missed some stuff. Some little things too, like extra details. Like you got everything. So definitely make sure. Most of you probably are already following him, but go follow him on Twitter. Everything.
There you go. You found out Lonnie Walker was non-guaranteed here.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
exactly. I did not know that at all. So that is very very interesting.
Inside information we wouldn't have otherwise. So appreciate you coming on, Mike. Definitely would love to have you on again at some point during the season. So, we'll reach out when the time comes. But thanks again for coming on. Thanks to everybody for listening. Make sure to check out Michael on all socials, Twitter. Check us out on all socials at 2for1 Hoops. And we'll be back with another episode sometime next week. But until then, hope everyone has a great rest of their day.